Hello, and welcome to episode 614 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, joined by Evan Silva and Mike Leone. Once again, we are actually less than 2 weeks away from the NFL regular season. It is nearly final exam time. Evan, how's it going?
It's going well. Keeping the rankings updated and already started outlining week one matchups. The Shy Away 30 will be out no later than Thursday night.
Very, very exciting. Man, Silva week one matchups already starting to get worked on. Makes me excited for DFS season, aka the best season. Leone, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited now too. Again, I mean, we got peak draft season for managed leagues, DFS around the corner. Good time to be alive.
On today's show, we are doing part 3 of our 4-part positional series. On each of these shows, we will be covering strategy for the position, who we're targeting, sleepers, busts, etc. 2 things before we get into it here. I am begging you to not show up to your draft with some free rankings list. We have a team of roughly 10 people constantly working on our top 300 rankings. We're debating, discussing everything. I mean, this morning we were discussing if Alan Lazard should get a 1.5% or a 2% target share bump on this Corey Davis retirement news. That is the kind of precision you need to win at your draft. And if you sign up for DraftKit Pro or Bundle right now, you will get $10 to use on any DraftKings best ball contest. No strings, no questions asked, don't have to deposit, nothing like that. Second, wanted to give a shout out to our friend JJ Zacharysen's pod, the Late Round Fantasy Football Pod. I honestly don't recommend or listen to many other fantasy football podcasts, but if you like ours, I suspect you'll like his as well. JJ's really good at reviewing historical data and conveying how it applies to this season, especially for season-long formats. So if you're looking to add another pod to your rotation, search Late Round Podcast wherever podcasts are found. All right, wide receiver. Traditionalists are not going to be happy here, Leone, because we are going to see Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Steph Diggs almost certainly all go in round 1. And then round 2 is going to be pretty wide receiver heavy as well. We're talking about A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra, Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, all I think have cases to go in the first 2 rounds. We're talking about half PPR home leagues here. We're going to have a lot of people doing wide receiver stuff. Maybe they're not as used to from a high-level strategy perspective. Leone, how do you think about how the wide receiver position is being played this year?
Yeah, first, we really got to know your league settings. We're talking about this from a half PPR perspective. Also, huge difference if you're starting 2 wide receivers in 1 flex versus 3 wide receivers in 1 flex. I mean, it might sound small, but that's a huge change on the positional scarcity and how early you're going to have to take these guys and how much depth you want at the wide receiver position. So I would keep that in mind. In general, like we talked about on the running back podcast, I think Silva and I at the beginning of drafts are pretty flexible, whether we're going wide receiver or running back. If it's the very early the first round, I think Jefferson, Chase are the clear 1 and 2. You definitely want to go with those guys. At that point, you could go to running back with CMC, Eckler, Bijan, whoever it is that you prefer. But definitely have Chase and Jefferson 1 and 2. And then where you really, I think, want to make your bank at wide receiver is getting these higher ceiling guys in rounds 5 and 6. We like Christian Watson, Christian Kirk, Drake London, those types. And then even after that, in round 7 through 9, you've got some room on your bench to stash some of the rookies that hopefully break out over the course of the season, whether it's Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston. All those guys are pretty gettable this year in that range of the draft.
Yeah, I think the top of wide receiver is pretty strong. I know people want to poke holes in Cooper Kupp and the injuries. I know people want to poke holes in Steph Diggs and some of the off-field stuff. Devontae Adams is getting older. Amon-Ra is just a slot receiver. But man, I think people are just looking for reasons not to be high on these guys. I think most of the wide receivers, if not all, that go in the first 2 rounds, including CeeDee and Amon-Ra and Waddle and Garrett Wilson, are all pretty strong. Evan, how do you think about wide receiver heavy starts and the overall thoughts on the position this year?
Just willing to be flexible based on what, how the draft comes to me. I like to let the draft come to me, especially in the top 25 or so. Make my first 2 picks almost sticking strictly to my rankings and then started to make decisions after that. What really stands out to me about the wide receiver position this year is I think that there are just some screaming values in, say, rounds 5 through 7. I think Brandon Ayuk showed a tremendous level of chemistry with Brock Purdy last year. And I love the way that Brock Purdy suits the Kyle Shanahan offense because he's going to be a distributor, a point guard. Brandon Ayuk, I think the arrow is clearly pointing up on him. He went for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. He's 25 years old. I think he's coming into his own. Mike Williams, I have ranked as like a top 18 wide receiver. His ADP on Fantasy Pros right now is wide receiver 28. Tyler Lockett, I don't what I'm guessing he'll come up a little bit after the Jackson Smith and Jigba injury. It's insane to me that his ADP among wide receivers is wide receiver 31. To me, he's a clear top 20 fantasy receiver.
Okay. And this is, if you guys listen to the running back pod, this is exactly why I said that I don't have to, but I prefer to get a running back in the first 2 rounds because I want to save my wide receiver picks, a bunch of them, for these outrageous values. We are talking about per home league ADP: Jerry Jeudy 58, Drake London 62, Christian Watson 64, Tyler Lockett 66, Brandon Ayuk 67, Mike Williams 70, Christian Kirk 75, Deontay Johnson 81, George Pickens 84, Jackson Smith-Njigba 90. I could keep going. Jahan Dotson 95, Gabe Davis 100. I could keep going with absolutely outrageous wide receiver values. And to me, that's why running backs are going to dry up quickly, that I prefer, when it's close, to go running back in round 1 or round 2 so that I can hammer these guys. I'm really comfortable with having those guys as my wide receiver 2, 3, 4. Now, ideally, I have a more loaded room than that, but there's some really good values late, Leone, if you follow what I'm saying here. So from an overall strategy perspective, even if you miss on some of these wide receivers early, who I love, you're going to be fine. I think we can beat our opponents better than any other position this year, in my opinion, by being smart about finding value later. Any takes on what I just said there, Leone?
Yeah, I think to add maybe some more detail to that is it's not that difficult to get a tier 1 wide receiver in rounds 1 and 2, maybe get 1 tier 2 wide receiver in rounds 3 and 4, and then maybe wait a little bit and avoid like that Amari Cooper range, maybe, and wait, and then just stockpile when you hit rounds 5 through 7. That's going to let you get 2 high ceiling running backs, maybe deviate at either quarterback or tight end, one of those positions, and you're still going to have, the 2 wide receivers you took early, and then 3, 4 guys even going down to your bench in that range. And it's a situation too where we're just collectively higher on wide receivers than I think most home league ADP is going to be. So to your point, Adam, like get the RBs when they're like break even values and we feel comfortable at their ceiling. And then just like anyone, and we have just some huge discrepancies in ADP. A Silva hit on Mike Williams, you can get in rounds 5 and 6. I like Christian Kirk, who you can get around 6 or 7. There's just Drake London you can get in round 5. The list just goes on, and you have backups. Where at running back, if you whiff and you end up going like, oh, here's James Conner, a volume dependent back, like those are the types we're trying to avoid. So we just have more wide receivers. So I think it's a good way to balance, get your elites early, wait a little while, and then stockpile your upside depth in the middle rounds.
Yeah. From a tier perspective, I do want to point out, I think there's a pretty big tier after Olave and Devontae Smith and T. Higgins, right? So like after those guys go, Olave, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, and then you get into that like Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins types. I think there's a pretty big tier break there. I'd rather be at the back of that tier than the front. There are some guys I know that you like though, Evan. DK Metcalf is in that next tier I was talking about. Amari Cooper, who I don't like, is in that next tier. I'm fine with Amari Cooper, especially if he goes in round 4 or 5, but not round 3. Any other thoughts on the middle here, Evan, as we move through wide receiver?
I recently moved Chris Olave way up based on, just talking to the Saints top beat writer, Nick Underhill. I mean, he's just beating the absolute drum on Chris Olave being the star of Saints training camp. And There have been mixed reports across the board about Michael Thomas. Alvin Kamara is going to be out for the first month of the season and maybe in decline. I mean, the seas are kind of parting for Chris Olave to have a monster season. I think DK Metcalf will as well. This is a guy who he's a perennial double-digit touchdown scorer. He only had 6 last year. And I think that the Seahawks are going to have more faith in their ability to stretch the field and maximize DK Metcalf's somewhat one-dimensional skill set by throwing the ball vertically more in the second season of Geno Smith as their starting quarterback, and with the 2 rookie tackles progressing into their sophomore season. So those are 2 guys that kind of stand out in that 12 to 18 wide receiver range.
Okay. I want to talk about rookies for a second here, Leone, because I think a big disparity between a lot of stuff we've been talking about and what will happen in home leagues. People in home leagues don't like to draft rookie wide receivers. I think they're good with it at the running back position. At wide receiver, nobody wants to take Jordan Addison. Nobody wants to take Quentin Johnston. Nobody wants to take Zay Flowers. And I think one thing you'll see that's consistent is overrating early season production. I think Quentin Johnston, JSN, Jordan Addison, by the end of the year are going to be pretty strong. How do you think about handling rookie wide receivers here in home league settings, Leone?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I think it's the skeleton key to building just an absolutely dominant roster. Historically, we've seen players that outperform their ADP by a huge amount. They're younger players with uncertainty. It doesn't mean the hit rate on Jordan Addison's going to be better than, let's say, the hit rate on Mike Evans, but when he does hit, it's going to be in a more meaningful way relative to cost, especially. So I think where they're going now, there's just such an opportunity where you don't have to draft them as your starters, one. So that risk doesn't really matter. You're waiting for them to break out after injuries occur to, other guys, there's bye weeks, or it just becomes clear they're must start. So it buys you time, and that lets you go to other positions in the first 8 rounds or so, and then still take 2 to 4 of these guys for your bench, depending on how big your bench is. I'm in on all of them. And the other thing too is guys like Addison and Zay Flowers should be pretty impactful right away. It's those guys are going to play, and they're going to be on offenses that are going to be able to support them, in my opinion. So there are other rookie receivers late, like Rashee Rice and whatnot, but those guys are a lot more risky in terms of just giving you zeros and not breaking out. So I'm not as interested in those guys. If you are, let's say, a little shaky on taking too many rookie receivers, I know a guy you really like, Adams, Jahan Dotson, but you still get that year 2 younger breakout profile, a guy who can crush his ADP with a little bit more safety because you've seen some production from year 1.
Yeah. I want to move to sleepers here, but I mean, I guess by ADP, some of these guys would be considered sleepers considering where they're going. Jahan Dotson, Gabe Davis, Quentin Johnston, Brandon Cooks, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton all have ADPs of 100 plus. I mean, we're packing in some really good floor ceiling combos to all those guys, in my opinion, and they go in the 100 plus range. Evan, any later round wide receivers that you want to mention to the people? It certainly doesn't have to be that thin. I think the hardcore community is used to Jaden Reed and Nico Collins and thin stuff like Jacoby Myers. I don't think you have to do that in a home league. I think we can just outvalue our opponents. But Evan, any sleeperish type wide receivers you want to mention?
Well, I'm going to kind of ignore your recommendation there, and I'm just going to skip right to the super late round guys. Sorry.
Well, but, there's plenty of deep league people listening. Go ahead.
Yeah. I wouldn't even say these guys are – I think these guys should be drafted. I mean, I think they're top 150 players. Jonathan Mingo is already locked into the first team with the Panthers, and I think the Panthers want him to grow with Bryce Young, and the same goes for Tank Dell. Now, Tank Dell is 165 pounds, which is always going to give me pause. But, man, he has really shined during really every stage of training camp, during the preseason. I think the Texans already believe that he's their number 1 receiver, and C.J. Stroud loves him. So I think that they think that those are 2 players that can grow together. Further up the board, I think that Sky Moore is a little bit interesting in Kansas City because it looks like he's locked into 2 receiver sets in that slot role. Elijah Moore is a player that I haven't been super high on, but compared to the field, because there have been times where he like will go in the top 70 or, maybe even top 60. And like, I'm definitely not want to take him there, but I know he's an explosive player. And I mean, I think that there have been indications that they want to give him a big role right off the bat.
It's the post-hype sleepers, right? Like I mentioned the rookies, but you got a lot of post-hype sleepers. Even further up the board, Gabe Davis is someone we really like in sharper leagues. He's flying up the boards, but in casual leagues, I still think people are thinking what he did last year, but he's going to be out there for 90% plus snaps and has this big playability, huge frame. Like he has a ton of upside. So I think the point really is, though, there are so many good upside bets at wide receiver late. I feel like in previous years, I really wanted more wide receivers earlier by round 6, by round 7, have 3 or 4, because it's harder to find these upside bets late. But there's we didn't mention Treylon Burks, who's the post-type sleeper mode. There's just so many guys, and in a smaller bench, home league setting too, some of these guys even going to be on waivers. Like if you're going to be quick to kind of any sign of breakout, pick them up. There's just, again, I think you can just stockpile a handful of these guys and kind of do like anchor, wide receiver, but with 2 guys to start.
Yep. From a bust perspective, for me, it's guys who I think the Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown thing has people out over their skis on a couple of these other rushing quarterbacks and wide receiver combos. Justin Fields is not Jalen Hurts, and DJ Moore is not AJ Brown. I think DJ Moore is going too high. And I think everybody would agree Michael Pittman is nowhere near AJ Brown, and Anthony Richardson is nowhere near Jalen Hurts. Yet Michael Pittman's ADP is still in the 70s in home leagues here. Like, that's pretty crazy to me, considering how far wide receiver is depressed around Michael Pittman. And so I'll let Anthony Richardson and Justin Fields prove it to me first before I'm investing a lot of capital in DJ Moore and Michael Pittman. Evan, any busts for you at the wide receiver position?
Michael Pittman also stands out to me. I mean, this dude caught 99 passes last year and averaged like 9 yards per catch. And he ain't coming anywhere near 99 catches again this year. Obviously, we've gone over this a lot, but I like DJ Moore better than you. Mm-hmm. Drake London, I mean, I really want him to happen, but it's like, how many targets is he going to get? I mean, everybody thinks that Bijan Robinson is going to get 300 touches. Kyle Pitts is there. I think that Tyler Algier is going to get a lot of carries, like 8 to 11 carries a game. How many targets are going to go the way of Drake London? How accurate are they going to be? How catchable and high value are they going to be coming from Desmond Ridder? I'm throwing up my hands on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My thought on Drake London is that he's just like a really good player who showed an ability to command 30% of the targets. And I think that Ritter is actually an upgrade on Mariota. So I'm still okay with Drake London, but I hear you. There's going to be some games where they literally run the ball like 35 times. It's not going to be pretty. Leone, any busts for you?
I think you guys are on it with Pittman. I'm more worried about Moore than I am London, but another guy I would go to is Amari Cooper, who I feel like just where he's being drafted, just feels like he's being drafted at his ceiling. The 3-4 turn, that's where, again, I'd rather take a shot at like an RB2 with a ton of ceiling. Whereas in the past, I might have kept getting wide receiver. Now with wide receivers being pushed up, like that's a shakier range. Like there's not much difference between Amari Cooper and Mike Williams for me. Maybe a bit more safety as far as the team's leading wide receiver. But in terms of pure upside, Mike Williams 2 rounds later, that's way better. So that's a guy that I don't think I'll exit any of my home league drafts with.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I just wanted to make one point. People are very hung up on, but Adam, this guy's number 2 wide receiver on his team. Like, I tweeted a team that I had with Jalen Waddle and T. Higgins, and people were like, well, that's great, but you have the number 2 wide receivers. You spent a 2nd and 3rd round pick on them. We need to think about things, I think, with a bit more nuance, the context around them, who else is on the team, how often the team throws, what % of the targets we think that these guys can get. And so to say guys like Mike Williams, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins aren't good picks because they're quote unquote the number 2, they still have really alpha stuff going on in their profile. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right.
Ben Gretchen and I on Establish the Edge talked about the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 stuff being nonsense, because there's these offenses now that you want to invest in that are just clearly superior to other offenses. And there's even some data that suggests that these wide receiver 2s have it a little bit easier being protected by the wide receiver ones, and there's still enough targets to go around. So it can be a best of both worlds situations for some of these guys.
For sure. All right. We've said it all at the wide receiver position. We'll be back next time to wrap up this series with the tight end position. If you guys are enjoying this series, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button on YouTube or on anywhere podcasts are found. Helps us out a lot, and it is free. For Evan, for Bruce Luke, for Leone, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.